And I'd like to offer the floor to Pavel Büchler.
Thank you very much. I feel that I have to start with an apology. It's always good to start with an apology. Not least because I'm an artist, and artists always have a lot to be sorry for, not to apologize for. First thing I may apologize for is that having listened to the two previous excellent contributions here, I feel that a very large portion of this already rather small carpet rug has been taken from underneath my feet, and I will need to find some kind of gap somewhere where I can still make some contribution. And I'm sorry if that contribution is not going to be all that inspired me. Well, it will be inspired because I had excellent sources of inspiration, but inspired me. I should also say sorry that or another thing I should apologize for is perhaps that I'm quite unprepared for this event. Now that, on my part, is a deliberate choice because having realized, having thought about it a bit and having realized what I'm getting myself into, I kind of felt that the contribution I could make is so slight that the only thing that you can get from it is watching me getting something from it myself. So I realized that the best strategy for this would be to think on my feet and to see if what I do as an artist, which does not fit either the rubric of the overall project that is war, my work has very little to do with that, nor does it in any clear way relate to the topic of our discussion, that is fear, if that can somehow become something different if it is presented under that rubric. So I'm here for my own very selfish reasons, and I want to kind of exercise my ability to see what it is that I'm doing, really. You can watch me at it, but I'm sorry if it is not going to be if it is not going to do anything else. Last but not least, every artist should be a little bit sorry for that kind of unfortunate condition under which every artist, at least in the Western Hemisphere, in the Western world, politically speaking, exists. And that is to say that in our culture, in our world, artists is permitted so much and yet able to achieve so little. The artist is permitted so much as a kind of cultural convention that has it that art is a paradigm of creative freedom, or at least some sort of exemplary compromise between the state of freedom and the kind of everyday of the considerations of the everyday sort of framework in which the artwork ultimately exists and in which the artist operates. The short text that introduces today's discussion in the exhibition guide starts with a reference to President George Bush, who mentioned the word fear allegedly 5 times in his first speech after 9/11. It reminded me, and the text reminds us, that of the kind of problems of setting or opposing the term fear is the term freedom. 5 times. It reminded me of another speech by another American president, J.F. Kennedy, in Amherst in 1961, where he famously said that there is no more noble and more important, more urgent task for a society than to set the artist free, so that he may follow the set the artist free so that he may follow his vision wherever it takes him. Now, that it's a sort of different idea of a different time, and I want you to bear that sort of difference in mind in what I'm going to try and say. I also maybe should say, sorry, that I don't really believe, and I think I shared that with the previous speakers, I don't really believe that the state of war that we are currently at, I'm being very careful, started with the 9/11. I do not believe that we are in a state of war in any kind of substantially different way or different sense than we have been for quite some time. If you look at for example, history of the 20th century, which was an exceptional bloody history, you would be hard-pressed to find globally a single day of peace. If you look at the events globally again, which are sort of within the range of our individual memories, why start with 9/11? Why not say 1969 and the attack of Israeli paratroopers at the Beirut airport? Or why not start with Mogadishu? Or why not start with Falklands? These why nots indicate to me that there isn't really a definitive kind of starting point for the state we are in. The state we are in kind of confuses me. But for people who are equipped with kind of more substantial ability to think clearly than I am, for somebody like Paul Virilio, for instance, the confusion itself is really the defining characteristic of the conflict that surrounds us or that we take part in. Paul Virilio talks about something that he calls war without a war. What he means by that is not only that the various sort of defining characteristics of the conflict have changed. I can mention, for instance, the kind of question of the nation state and the territory, something you can fight for or flee from or flee to, return to, and so on. Not only that those things have changed, but the most confusing aspect of it is that they have not changed with any particular single element. It seems that bit by bit, states, political interests began to behave like individual terrorists. There is no clear moment in recent history that the war that we are now talking about started. It is a product of a kind of ongoing confrontation and conflict. In the same way, we can look at the question of no, I want not we can. In the same way, I can look at the question of fear and so on. Just as the war is war without a war, and just as it is something that is kind of that comes, as it were, almost from nowhere, I want to look at fear as a really form of anxiety resisting its condition. Now, anxiety, already mentioned by Henke's brilliant analysis of fear as a kind of relational thing and what it implies. Anxiety, to me, is a state of fear without fear. It's not just the fear of fear, which would be, which is applicable to the Heinz analysis of the kind of fear as a mobilizing power in the political sphere, but to something at much lower level. My anxiety, for instance, at the moment, my great fear is that at the end of this talk I will have no credibility left. It's at that low, everyday level. And so I will call it fear without fear. Anxiety differs from fear in that it does not have a specific logic. I would say at that low level, it does not even have that fear itself that it should fear. Anxiety is not fearless, but it fears. Anxiety is a state where we know that another state will follow. There are consequences, but we don't know what they are. And in fact, the consequences may not be that heavy, that kind of, or even noticeable enough for us to fear them specifically. Anxiety, in my sense, or in the sense I want to talk about it today, comes from, on the one hand, an awareness of interconnectedness, a kind of, if you like, effectiveness of what you do, what is happening around you, what you are taking part in, but at the same time of not even being able to determine, say, even a rough course of action, a rough kind of, and therefore a rough kind of general course of action. So, for instance, you may be anxious, or I am anxious right now, about speaking already for 12 minutes and 54 seconds without actually even moving the slide. The consequence of that will be that I may overrun my allotted 40 minutes and feel really embarrassed. Now, what is going to be a consequence of that? And so on and so on and so on. The consequences wither into such small things, into such small inconsequentiality. It's a kind of consequence without consequences. That it triggers of anxiety. Kendall will probably be pleased with this, or maybe not. I'm an artist who works in a kind of different key. Maybe I don't really do very much. I kind of think that it is the job of the artist to look around and notice things that are already in place and point them out to others, and that's really my main kind of technique, if you like. I selected for you today a desperate and disparate presentation from various bits and pieces, and I will try and kind of look at that work in relation to today's topic. However, consideration of questions like fear and anxiety is not where that work comes from. Good versus evil. It's just a technical description of the work. The work is a reprint of a typographic error from a previous issue of the magazine in which this work is being published. It's very hard to see here, but the title of the work is Flux, the name of the magazine, number 34, 2002, page 107, which is exactly where that mistake very kind of fortunately appeared, good versus evil. On an occasion like this, it kind of gives me a tiny bit of ammunition here, a tiny bit of little carpet, because it makes that kind of, or it could be read in the present context as an allusion to the kind of problematic position of poetics, maybe, in confrontation with the issues that we are dealing with. Anxiety is, in a kind of psychological sense, is or as a metaphor, psychology, is something that I'm kind of rather interested in. This is a piece of work for the Center for Freudian Analysis and Research from about 1999, which is both an acknowledgement of an anxiety as the kind of force that deprives you of self-confidence to decide what to do next. I was invited to take part in this exhibition, which was taking place in a room of about this size, in a small institution which is devoted to the discussion of psychoanalysis. One of the members of the research center is the curator and artist Jean, who has this habit of always kind of invite everybody she knows to take part in a show. So when I arrived, I found that the already small gallery was full of rather beautiful pieces of work, and that there really wasn't anything very much that I could possibly do. My intention was to kind of like tonight think on my feet and do something on the spot. In the end, I found the most perfect opportunity staring me in the face when, in kind of complete depression, I retired to the bathroom to sort of meditate a bit and decide the course of action. The light fitting that you see there in the shower cubicle for the staff of the center was an existing light fitting, a kind of health and safety officer's nightmare. And what I did with it is that I used something called a capacitor, which is a small electrical device which makes the light behave erratically, or the light bulb behave erratically. So you get this kind of constant, rather kind of hysterical kind of flicker of the light. It's been about 17 minutes and 50 seconds, so I skip that one. What to do with anxiety? How to make it... I'm sure somebody was anxious that this was going to happen. Not Daniela, she would have wished to do. It's for you, Daniela. It's not so difficult how to make it go away. You take some cotton wool, you kind of put a little bit of pressure on it, rub it maybe with a bit of steel wool. If that doesn't help, back to some rag or cotton wool. Circular movement is pretty good, making it go away. If that doesn't work, push it back and forth, use some harder object to do it with. Circular movement is the other way, or whatever kind of movement this implies, or whatever kind of movement this implies. Try the figure of 8. If nothing else helps, squeeze a little bit of some stuff on it, sponge it off again, back to the cotton wool, and it's gone. Voila. There you go. Now, the question here, of course, is what is this it that we are trying to make go away? That very much depends on where the kind of anxiety lies. In the present case, with this work, the first time this work was used, the anxiety actually lied in a world that at least overlaps with our interest today. It was first published in the courtesy of Katrin Pichler and the Museum in Progress in the Austrian daily Der Standard as part of a campaign which kind of was self-consciously trying to make Austrian newspaper readers aware of the then already well-established presence of Jörg Haider and the extreme right in the Austrian government. So the question of how to make it go, or the it in the question, becomes quite specific. But of course it does not need to be that very specific. Artists, or at least I, am not trying to come up with even propositions for anything very specific. I'm trying to find a position from which to look at the world and share what I see with others. So promptly I used the very next opportunity to put the whole thing back to front in a publication which was to do with visual anthropology, and what prompted my journal to do with visual anthropology, and what prompted my decision to use this piece of work was the title of the volume, which was Aesthetics and the Ends of Art. So I titled End of Art, how to make it come back. And the thing was printed, and voila, the next thing we see on the first subsequent page is a headline that reads "The Filmed Return of the Natives to a Colonizing Territory of Terror." You are trying to make it go away, it comes back by itself. That's a really, this is what is so beautiful about being an artist. Meanwhile, as they say, this is what happened on Monday. I got up at 11, went to the studio, wrote a few letters, and went home again. Meanwhile, a bus full of school children crashed on a motorway in France. This is what happened on Tuesday. Get up at, I can hardly read it, went to the studio, wrote a few letters, and went home again. Meanwhile, 8 something happened somewhere else. And so it went on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then finally on Sunday I got up mid-morning, typed up what happened, and finished in time for the lunchtime news. It's a kind of a piece of work which tries to deal with the kind of anxiety of not really knowing how to respond with things that are perhaps too horrible to even write down in a way that you can kind of ever read them again. And it's to do with the relationship maybe between a routine, which is what happens every day, which is one of our defenses against anxiety, and what disrupts that routine and makes that kind of routine not just a sort of safety zone that you run into, but also the base you kind of work from. Where you work from makes, obviously, as we know, where you are, it's a matter of perspective, makes the world look different, your sort of position in the world makes the vision of the world different and relative. This is a piece of work which is called Between Here and There and There and Here, and it's a set of 26 books for the 26 letters of alphabet. They are all identical, it's in the edition is 26, which were slotted into the existing reference library of the Czech Cultural Center in New York about a couple of years ago, and a set of wall drawings. And work has been done in various places. This is a New York version. This is a kind of diagram of the London version, which was just wall drawings. The drawings are of the spaces between two words, the last letter of the first word and the second, and the first letter of the subsequent word, and words are names, place names of places that were in the news within the immediate kind of within the 2 or 3 weeks immediately prior to the exhibition. Every time I did it, so between Mecca and London, you get a kind of I don't even know how to describe it. It looks like some kind of a first sketch for Franz Stella thing. And between Maghreb and London, you get something else, and between Vladovac and London, you get again something else. When you turn it round and look at it from London, come on, look at this. Because I'm an anxious person, I went my anxieties privately in writing my diary. In 2001, I wrote my diary for a whole year on a single page, in 2012, I wrote it differently. In 2003, I wrote it at a rate of 1 page per month. Looked like this. Here's a piece of work which deals with a different kind of an anxiety, and that's the kind of relationship we have as a kind of recipients of types of communication and sort of forms of statement which really makes us anxious about where we are as participants in language, as it were. Everybody has this experience. Pretty much every day, you or at least I get a letter from a managing director of a huge bank or a president of a board of some massive international company, offering you a kind of enticing you almost, seemingly, into a form of relationship or a communication which is deeply personal. So, dear Professor Büchler, if you might like to hear about our new credit card, should you be interested in opening an account with us, we will give you a biro pen or a ticket to a football match, and we take it from there. And you feel this is amazing. Look, there is this hugely powerful character son at the bottom of the letter that is offering me a biro. Wow. So one day in 2001, I decided to respond individually to every single one of those pieces of junk mail that come through your letterbox. And the response was always phrased in the same way. You can't read it there, but it says, "Dear so-and-so, your name has been added to the list." And I copied the signature of the person named at the bottom of the letter, and always placed it in the same position where it was on the original letter, so that and sent it off individually. So the first addressee received a piece of paper saying, in fact, the first one said, "Dear so-and-so, your name will be the first on the list," and then her signature and mine, and the second one had the 3 signatures, and the third one had 4, and so on and so on and so on. Until after about a year and a half, the first stage is after about, 3 months, the second stage is after about 6 months, and then I stopped kind of documenting it. After about a year and a half, this dense kind of abstract doodle sort of built up on the letter. And I was very pleased with doing this until a curator somewhere found out about it, allegedly by accident, and contacted me, worked out it must have been me, and contacted me and said I want to put it into this exhibition. And I wasn't quite sure how I could now sort of deal with that, because the work was sort of not even a work, it was just something you do in the world. And so in order to have something to show, I had to reverse the process, and I created a whole new second set of these letters, which kind of works backwards, where where the text on the top of the letter now says, "Dear so-and-so, your name has now been removed from the list." And I exhibited those, and I sent one set of these letters, a mail shot, back to all those addressees. I like that idea that they can now rest in peace. The anxiety is really... Now this may look like a kind of jokey piece of work, and it probably is. Nevertheless, artists can only do so much, and there is a kind of indication in it of all kinds of things, of these small things that I mentioned at the beginning that may happen. Just imagine, these things are going to institutions. Institutions are not places, Barclays Bank is not a place where, mail can go astray. It's kind of quite fascinating. There are protocols and rules and systems in place for dealing with every piece of paper that arrives. I like the idea that there isn't a pigeonhole for really what the letter is or is trying to be is always going to be interrogative, is always going to cause or be part of some anxiety at some very, very low level. Of course it's going to end up in everything. And of course it may well be that if I, despite all sort of indications and probability when they become a famous artist perhaps, that somebody is going to be tearing their hair even for throwing it into the bin. That kind of low level of anxiety is really something that should be of a great interest to an artist. It's of an interest to me. Lastly, a piece of work which has just about now reached some conclusion. Slightly different. It deals with, or different than the kind of miniatures that I've shown you so far. It deals with a whole wide range of things of which anxiety may only be one, but nevertheless I try to present it as a piece that deals with anxiety. The piece is made of two components. One is the hardware. These two objects there are something called the Marconi sound projector. It's a loudspeaker designed in 1926 by Marconi, and it's a kind of state-of-the-art audio technology of its time. Its original purpose was to project sound at a great distance being about, I don't know, 300 to 500 meters, very clearly in a kind of very directed way. The second component is a text passage from Franz Kafka, from the castle, the bit where the village landlady is trying to explain to the land surveyor why he, as a stranger, is always a source of a problem or a source of an anxiety, if you like, and why there is no obvious or easy or even imaginable, actually, in the context of the novel, answer to that. Now, that why is incredibly convoluted in that sort of short passage. When you read it, it becomes incredibly, on the one hand, the logic of the novel, it seems kind of convincing, but at the same time, there is no answer, there is no real right, there is no real rationale. Now, we know that this, in Kafka's writing, comes from the way he was able to use a very particular form of address, very particular, or mode of address, very particular language which came from his daytime job, which was an insurance clerk. And once translated into that language, an argument which doesn't seem to be, without some sort of a reason, suddenly becomes this strange kind of string of words which explain without giving you any reassurance, without giving you any kind of certainty, any kind of clarity, and so on. Hence, anxiety. This was the first version of the piece. This was the second version of the piece that was shown in Malmö at the Roseum, where the whole thing was installed, a little bit like the kind of when the image created refers perhaps to the kind of propaganda technology and the symbolism of the kind of propaganda of the country that I come from, which is Czechoslovakia, in the 1960s and 70s, and finally this is the version. Come on. Doesn't want to do anything.
Just listen to these, sir. Just listen to these, sir. Just listen to the gentleman is itself without considering man's position he is the very high.
For most members, we are only considering mere ways of means of getting information. You are outcast. You are not from the village. You are a stranger. Or rather, unfortunately, you are something of a stranger. A man who is unappreciated from his way. A man who is misleading. A man who takes up a mate. A man whose intentions are impure. A man who is a greater irrelief. Whom we just unfortunately accept as her husband. I don't know that against you. You are what your husband has seen nothing in my lifetime. Just listen to me, sir. A man is gentle and from the castle, and that himself, without considering the man's position hereat, means that he is a very high rank. But what are you? For whose marriage you are humbly considering here with his and years of against your mission. You are not from the castle. You are not from the village. You aren't anything. Or rather, unfortunately, you are something, a stranger, a man who isn't wanted and is in everybody's way, a man who's always causing trouble, a man who takes up the maid's room, a man whose intentions are obscure, a man who has ruined the liberty of freedom and me must unfortunately accept as her husband. I don't hold all that up against you. You are what you are, and I have seen enough in my lifetime to be able to face facts. Just listen.
Hören Sie, Herr Klamm ist aus dem Schloss.
Actually, I'll stop here. Now, forgot to mention the third component of the work is the technology that actually is used to produce the sound, which are synthetic voices, something called text-to-speech technology. There are no human beings involved in the production of this work. No dolphins have been killed in the production of the work, and no human beings are really involved in the production of the sound. As you can see, I'm kind of struggling here to make myself fit as an artist, the topic here. But on the other hand, I'm quite glad that I have that opportunity to do that, because having said at the beginning that I don't really believe that if we are sort of at war as society or as the Western culture in any profoundly different way than that we have been at war for centuries. I do feel that there is a war going on, there is a conflict going on, there's always a conflict in which we take part. However, whatever we do, that conflict is part of our condition. That's what we live. We live in a world which for a very, very long time is always at war in one way or another, or actually in one way. What seems to prompt these moments, these discussions of sort of heightened attention, are events and sort of points in those sort of ongoing conflicts that somehow become so visible, so kind of present, so close at hand, that we can no longer console ourselves with kind of it's not happening here. We can no longer sort of ignore them. And I feel that given that, the artist's job is to acknowledge that we sort of exist in that condition, or one of the artist's jobs. What I would argue, though, is that the artist's job is equally to acknowledge that these states, these situations, are not just something that are just not those loud noises and loud voices and powerful images, but that they are made up of everything that we do, right from the bottom, right from the everyday anxieties that we all sort of live by and that we work from. Now that's 40 minutes, 37 seconds.
Thank you very much. Daniela has an urgent question.
No, I have a question because for me, when seeing this work and also when talking about it with you, this work is also about fear of strangers and fear of not fitting. And we also spoke about voices that you used, which could be foreign voices or synthetic voices. And that way, in that sense, some of your works do relate to fear, maybe fear of the other or fear of not fitting. Or could you elaborate on that?
Etymology. Well, we need a term which is so burdened with that sort of classical etymology, why we can't simply say fear, why we have to say phobia. It's almost like that point of fear which is so specific that it becomes unspecific again. So when I say that my work is not self-consciously related to fear or experience of fear, it is nevertheless anchored in some kind, or rooted in some kind of anxiety. And when I deal with or make an allusion to a specific phobia, it would always again be in an unspecific way. Because, for instance, xenophobia, the fear of the stranger, is not a simple matter of being afraid of the Germans or being afraid of the Japanese, or you know. Xenophobia, as we know it, is only a name that we give an emotion that we don't quite understand, so that we may understand it. Now, our job is to propose not different understandings, but to point out that there are different understandings, that there must be different understandings, that this cannot be all.
But in what way was this work about? Could you elaborate a little bit?
In what way it is about xenophobia?
Yeah.
Well, that's that's almost the starting point. I mean, to the extent that Kafka's novel is all about the effect that the presence of a stranger in a community have both on that community and on the identity of the stranger, negotiating the identity of the stranger, because the identities are not given a priori, as it's kind of identity-forming situation, the arrival of the stranger into the community. So to that extent, it's just a borrowing. I borrowed that situation already ready-made, as it were, from Kafka, just as I took whatever symbolism you can kind of squeeze out of the design of the speakers out of the 1920s technology and so on, already ready-made. My idea was to bring these things together, bring them together with a technology which now replaces that old technology that is with the synthetic voice, to problematize the question of, who is the stranger in this situation? What is the strange? Rather than straightforwardly actually say this is about a stranger in a community. It's about strangeness rather than stranger.
Is there any other question related to Pavel's presentation?
It's actually a question for Henk.
That's later.
I just wanted to pick up on what Daniela was asking, because also it seems to me that Kafka is quintessentially about administrative fear. It's about the way that bureaucracy or rules instill fear into a situation, and it seems to me that is a situation that we're in at the moment. I think we always have, and we always understand the idea of the fear of death, the fear of being killed, the fears that Kendall was talking about, whatever it is, the fear of violence. But it seems to me that one thing that this addresses, and one thing that maybe is a mark of totalitarian systems, and the question is whether we're becoming a totalitarian system now, is this question of how the administration or the bureaucracy constructs fear around the question of allowing and not allowing things to happen, giving permission for certain things to happen and not to happen. I'm missing what's happening behind me.
Daniela is searching for candles somewhere upstairs, but he's been sitting there all the time. Sorry, that's disrelated.
I lost my train of thought, but I think that I suppose what interests me is the way that we seem to be in a situation through the notion of through immigration, and this is referring to the Netherlands, but I think it's true of most of the old European Union, where fear is coming to a level not of the personal, not necessarily of anxiety, but it's being written into the administrative bureaucratic laws. That fear is becoming the way in which we are being administered. In other words, that our anxiety levels, which you talked about, are one thing, which is to do with the individual. The other thing that I think this work points out, to be honest, is the way that that's then administrated in a system where you no longer know what the rules are quite, where the rules themselves are hidden by the administration, by which you never know when you're going to transgress them. And I think this is the situation that we have with terrorism, where you never know when it might be possible that you could be accused of being a terrorist. It becomes a kind of generalized administrative and instrumentalized form of fear through that administration. And I wonder whether that relates to this work, or whether that is something that we haven't talked about sufficiently yet.
No, we haven't talked about it sufficiently yet, but it does relate to that work, just as its opposite relates to the work. You could take exactly the opposite view, and as you know, we discussed this yesterday. Maybe I should have shown some kind of different work which would more explicitly which would help me to be more explicit on that point. But yes, I agree. Rules are designed to instill fear. They are also ostensibly designed to be received as something that alleviates fear. If you have rules, there is less the fear, because there are systems for dealing with it. We have quite a bit of snow out there, we have no rules for that, so there is a problem. But for everything else, increasingly we have rules. I bet you anything that if Tony Blair stays in the government for another 4 years, there will be rules for snow, there will be rules for weather. It will be bumped or whatever. Because rules have that kind of, that's the perversity of it, and that is, for me, the source of anxiety, and maybe anxiety at a much higher level, like you mentioned. On the one hand, we have rules. Increasingly, those rules rely on prohibition. We ban this, we restrain this, we eliminate this, and so on. They are negative. It's negative legislation. I think any history of any Western government in the last decade or whatever could be mapped or statistically expressed in these terms, and it would come out that 80% of all legislation is prohibitive legislation these days. On the other hand, these very same rules, these very same mechanisms are devised in such a way as to kind of generate the opposite effect too, to alleviate fear, alleviate anxiety, which probably is what I meant by mobilization. Mobilization does not necessarily mean a call to arms only, but putting in motion, as you said, directing the masses. And yes, this is what the work is also about. And the most important thing for me is, as an artist, not just with this work, but with all the work, is that the work can do kind of certain work. That the work works, that it generates something, it triggers some response. There is no art when the work is in the studio or in my head. Art is only there where the work is sort of in its social destination. And what is the issue that artists really need to address, which is in what I didn't perhaps manage to say so clearly in my convoluted way, the issue that artists really need to address, or at least bear in mind and think about, is how that effect of the work is very dependent not only on all those clearly definable facets of the context, such as we are at war with terror or whatever, this is the era of Bush and Blair and so on, but also at those, how dependent it is at those kind of lower level of anxieties that we are all subject to and with which the viewer and the audience face the work. So yes, the work is about those issues, but it also is about much less, and that's good.
Thank you. I think that's the moment that I would like to invite Henk and Kendall, Daniela Franz, to join the panel, because Henk felt that he wanted to react, so please go ahead.